we're on the home stretch to lunch. We're very close. But before that, we've got a trio of presenters who will be presenting around Refuges before we go to lunch, and that is Michelle Olley, Claire Marshall. So Michelle is from VincentCare, Claire is from Emerge, and Lisa is from Good Shepherd. Michelle's been in the community services sector for 10 years and has experience across volunteering, tenancy, housing, case management, and also been employed at VincentCare's Olives Place Refuge for 7 years, including as a practitioner, coordinator and manager. Michelle's got a Diploma of Community Services, an advanced diploma of Community Sector Management, and currently studying a Bachelor of Social Work. Michelle is also a survivor of family violence and has a strong desire to support families and animals to recover from the effects of abuse. Claire is a human rights lawyer with extensive experience working with institutions in the public, private and not-for-profit sector on how to prevent and respond to gender inequality and family violence. She's an expert in gender equality and has led systemic research on the drivers and the impacts of gender inequality and gendered violence in a number of complex settings, advising organisations on how to create lasting change. Most recently, before leading Emerge as CEO, Claire has worked as the Director of an independent review on the Victorian custodial system, Director of the merger between DVVic and DVRCV to form Safe and Equal, and also led a legal team at DJCS for victim survivors of gendered violence, and led the independent review into the Victorian Police at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. Jeez, what a bio! Impressive. Lisa, lastly Lisa, but certainly not least, joined Good Shepherd in 2017 as a specialist family violence case manager before going to the Orange Door, where she worked in intake and assessment, managing clients presenting in crisis. Lisa's current portfolio includes the management of 26 properties, including the Refuges, crisis accommodation properties, Good Shepherd houses and transitional houses. Lisa also works in Good Shepherd's After Hours program, assisting women and children placed in emergency accommodation. Lisa's passionate about working with women and children who've experienced family violence in order for them to live a life free of violence. I would like you to welcome Michelle, Claire and Lisa as they come up and speak. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. I'm Michelle, and I just want to say that it's lovely to be here on country, and I just want to pay my respects to the Bunurong people of Kulin Nation. And it's also lovely to be back here at Chisholm because I did my diploma here, so it's very special. We don't have a PowerPoint today, and that's because Refuge is a secret. I'm joking, that's a Refuge joke. So we thought we'd just talk to the experience. So what is Refuge? So Refuge really is a place where you go when you need to be hidden and protected from the perpetrator or person using violence. So if you're somebody who has money, friends, family, resources, you're likely not going to go to Refuge because you can draw on your own supports to get yourself out of that situation. So a lot of the families that we work with, or single people that we work with, are people from very low socioeconomic backgrounds. They're from culturally and linguistically diverse communities where they don't know anybody in Australia, they might not have access to any funds. So they are people experiencing a lot of disadvantage, and Aboriginal people as well. So how do we get into Refuge? Well, it can happen in a few different ways, but usually there's a tipping point. So there might be a critical incident that has happened in the home, and for example, police have been called. So police showed up, they, we're lucky. Police have shown up and they have said to the woman, I'm going to use gendered language because overwhelmingly it is women and children who are the victims, and it overwhelmingly is men who are perpetrating the violence. And so they've said to mum or a single woman, it's really unsafe for you to be here, you've got to leave now. And so what might happen is somebody, a social worker might come along, sit down with her, make a phone call to Safe Steps, which is the statewide crisis line, and say, this person really needs to get out of this situation. And so that person then will be put in a motel, most likely, which is not the most ideal place to go after an incident like that has happened. You're in a motel. Sometimes nobody can get out and see you, so you're very isolated, you're by yourself. And sadly, you might sit in that motel for anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks to a few weeks, waiting for a refuge space, because there's not very many of them across the state. It's a very finite resource. So that's obviously not great, but that's the reality of the situation. Or you might be in a situation where you've recognised yourself that I'm having violence perpetrated against me, and you might self-refer. So you might ring a family violence service, you might call the Orange Door, you might call Safe Steps, and they will say, okay, come in, we'll do an assessment. So you might have heard the terms MARAM today, talked about comprehensive risk assessments. So a specialist family violence worker will do one of those, and eventually it finds its way to our refuge. So we receive that assessment, we take a look at it, and if we've got a vacancy and it looks good and it's a match, we will then bring that family in, or that single woman, usually a woman, into our refuge. Mindful of time, so that's pretty much how intake goes. And so I'm going to pass over to Lisa, who's going to talk to you a bit about what happens once you get to refuge.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi everyone, I'm Lisa. I'm the Family Violence Team Leader for Good Shepherd Australia and New Zealand, and I manage the Refuge and Accommodation portfolio. I'd just like to acknowledge the country. So Good Shepherd acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the First Nations and traditional owners of the lands, waters and skies throughout Australia. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise the right to self-determination and their continuing connection to culture. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So I'm going to try and give you just a really brief snapshot of what case management looks like on a day-to-day, how we work. So we have a core and cluster, so the core is the office and the cluster is the 6 self-contained units that sit around that office. We work with women for 6 to 8 weeks, and it's a 24/7 supported accommodation model with intensive case management. So it's a bit different from the normal case management program because it is such a short time frame. So we're meeting with women quite regularly, and the women and children have obviously been displaced because they've left their family home, they've gone into crisis accommodation, and they've made their way to our refuge. So once they've come through intake, we'll review the MARAM. So we're always assessing and managing that risk that's ongoing throughout the whole support period. We'll do information sharing, so that could be with court, police, corrections and other agencies. We'll always safety plan with them whilst they're in refuge, and then if they're going to the community or if they're depending on what's happening for them. We do secondary consultations, and then we'll do a needs assessment, and from that needs assessment we do a case plan. And the case plan, so everyone has a case plan, the children will have their own individual case plans as well. And within that case plan, we'll look at things like safety and environment, psychological and emotional health. We'll make referrals if we need to internally. We have our own internal counselling program within Good Shepherd. Psychoeducation, we look at physical health, education and training, employment, finances. That could be linking them in with Centrelink. We work with a lot of cold communities as well. So that would be Good Shepherd's biggest cohort is women on temporary visas. So we look at linking them in with legal support services, court support, if they need to get an intervention order, parenting, childhood development and wellbeing. So we do have Good Shepherd have IFS, so Integrated Family Services, so we can do internal referrals to them as well if we need to. There's a lot of liaising with other services, child protection, police, and then housing would be the biggest, the main focus when they come into Refuge, because it is such a short time frame. We're always exploring what their exit plans might be. So some of the exit pathways we look at are private rentals. We can utilise the properties that we have. So there are transitional houses, we've got the Good Shepherd properties, so we can, if there's movement in them, we can look at that. Office of Housing, we have supported women to move interstate if that's safe for them, and even overseas. So we've had New Zealand clients, we've supported them to go back to New Zealand. And we can also look at supporting them to move home if it's safe to do so with a PSI response, so Personal Safety Initiative. And my colleague Hannah Barker will be on one of the tables in the World Cafe to talk a bit more about that. That's pretty much it for me. I'll hand over to Claire.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Michelle. And I'd also, on behalf of Emerge, like to take a moment to acknowledge country. We're on the lands of the Bunurong people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge that sovereignty of these lands was never ceded. So my name's Claire. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the pathway out of Refuge. So as we've heard, coming into Refuge, you've often had complex experiences of intergenerational trauma and disadvantage. So we're talking about mostly women and children who have experienced across their entire lives inequality and disadvantage. And at our Refuge, as well as other organisations that we work with and our colleagues across the sector, we see people coming with little more than the clothes on their back. And you can understand that that puts people in a really, really challenging space, a lack of any supports or infrastructure behind them to let them safely return to the community. So a big part of what we do is breaking the cycle of violence. Violence is cyclical, and it's linked to poverty and disadvantage and trauma. And without giving people the right supports, the right infrastructure, the right mechanisms to return to the community, you are increasing that risk that they will either re-engage with the perpetrator and come back through the system, have other demands which need help from the broader social services sector, or themselves as traumatised people and victim survivors in their own right will become perpetrators. And it's an uncomfortable conversation within the sector where a big part of prevention and our work every day is critical for preventing violence from happening again. So when we're helping a family or a woman come out of Refuge, we're giving them the infrastructure so that they don't return. That's increasingly complex. As you've heard, there's a lot of people experiencing family violence who are from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. We have really high rates of First Nations people across the service sector, and increasingly we're seeing people who have no PR. So all the supports that you would rely on, like Medicare, like Centrelink, are not available to them. So their vulnerability is incredibly high. And so we work to help to get them connected to the community. And often it's not their own community because of the ingrained structures that have brought them to experiences of violence. They often have to start again. That means a new school for the kids. That means financial education and literacy for women who often haven't been given any autonomy in that space at all. So that tranche of case management that Lisa spoke to is all about empowering people and giving them the autonomy to go out back into the community themselves. At Emerge, we have a principle where we will not release people into homelessness, and that is an enormous part because we know that it takes about 7 times for every victim survivor, 7 times that they'll go back to the perpetrator. And that number reduces the more you can give somebody. The more you can give somebody in terms of a safe place to live, in terms of services that support them, in terms of therapeutic intervention and counselling, because as we've seen, with our colleagues at Department of Justice, we're also talking about a cycle of trauma, an intergenerational cycle of trauma. And trauma will have a significant impact on somebody's outcomes, irrespective of who they are in the family experiencing violence. And so we really focus on therapeutic support and therapeutic intervention as part of that package of care before somebody is equipped to leave. And that's increasingly complex with children because you can't sit on a couch and have a yarn to a kid. They don't work like that. So we have specialists in things like play therapy and art therapy to help a child understand their experience of trauma and also dyadic work. That means mum and child together. So we help them to repair the bond that's often broken by family violence. So the child has secure attachment and the parent is able to parent safely in a way that meets that child's needs. Only when we have all that infrastructure ready will we release somebody back into the community. And obviously this is all about their empowerment, their consent, their autonomy, because without that, you perpetuate that cycle. You let them feel a particular way about themselves, their place in the community, their place in the family, that enables violence to continue. Our average day is long. We have families with us for up to 8 years. We celebrated the other week because a family with 5 children finally got an Office of Housing property. It took 5. There's a crisis in our community and we need more investment across the sector to break that cycle so it stops happening. That's about all I've got probably time for. Oh great, no, well, I think that was what we wanted to cover, so happy to take questions.
Oh, perfect.
Thanks.
Does anyone have any questions?
It's the referrals that we're receiving from Safe Steps are predominantly from, culturally and refuges. I don't know what that looks like with the other refuges, like the cohort.
With ours, 100% of our refuge clients in 2022 were culturally and linguistically diverse. It's the absolute majority of them. Increasingly, with the kind of the crisis of cost of living and the financial crisis at the moment, we're getting people who are permanent citizens and from wealthier suburbs come to Refuge, which is really interesting as a kind of a socioeconomic phenomenon, but largely it's the most disadvantaged members of our community and people who particularly have no PR that come through our Refuge. How about you?
Thank you. Another question?
I've never seen the housing as bad as it is at the minute, and just wanted to, I don't know, how are you managing that? Like, how does Refuge?
Yes, it's actually incredibly difficult. So I would say from my experience at Olive's Place, 100% of our clients cannot afford private rental. So before we've even started, that option is completely off the table. And so housing options really are transitional housing through providers such as Launch or VincentCare, Haven Home Safe and other homelessness providers. And then community housing and public housing. But those offers don't come through very often. So we're actually funded as refuge organisations to work with these clients for 8 weeks, and that is very unrealistic. So as you heard from Claire, she's had victim survivors there for multiple years, and that's true for a lot of us. So they can be in our refuge for months and months. And if you think about, it's confidential, you can't tell anybody, so you can't have visitors, you can't have people come and support you, you can't tell anybody where you are. That is an extremely isolating experience to have for 8 weeks, but to have go on for years and years is quite detrimental. So yeah, housing is difficult, but it does happen. So those offers do come up, after a certain amount of time. And I can promise you that through my experience, everybody that has come into Refuge has left. But it doesn't always mean that they've gone into housing. So sometimes, like I was saying, it's a very isolating experience and it's not for everybody. It's a hard gig and it takes a lot of resolve to stick that out, especially when you have children. It can be very difficult. So sometimes other options occur. Friends and family might take them in. Sadly, we do see some people return. They might then decide to go into mediation with the person using violence and try and reconcile. So there's all different sort of situations that can occur, but housing's tough. Do we have?
Thanks, Michelle. We've got time for one more question.
I was going to ask about why the government, no longer pays the gap between New Start and what is then what they can't afford for a private rental. I think previously, prior to 2010, the government was subsidising that. If that's changed recently.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're just at the mercy of whatever government is, is in charge at the time. Just historically, yeah, we do tend to get a bit more funding out of the Labor government, and yeah, we're just at their mercy. So whatever they decide is what really impacts. So there's really, as we know, Centrelink incomes are nowhere near enough to support cost of living, and even more so for our culturally and linguistically diverse clients who are on special benefit. That's the same as job seeker. It's really not much, so they don't qualify for single parent pension or anything like that. And even though the visa laws have changed recently and they can now apply for PR, the wait list for Centrelink income is ridiculous. So we got a letter the other day from one of our clients. You will be waiting, if they got PR, you'll be waiting 4 years for a single parent pension, by which time the child will be over the threshold that she qualifies. Yeah, I wish there, it sounds very doom and gloom. But yeah, just got to hope and lobby and continue to advocate that there's change.
Yeah, it's that eternal funding challenge, isn't it? Please join with me in thanking Claire, Lisa and Michelle. And as stretched as they are and as difficult as the work is, it's so great to see that we do have these support systems there and safety nets. Some more would be great, but we certainly grateful for the work that you all do. So thank you.